Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with Dark Dry Drew. It is Thursday, December the 27th, 2018. It is 8 p.m. New York time, 5 p.m. Los Angeles time, 1 in the morning in London, England, and in Sydney, Australia, it's around 12 noon. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in, listening live. We're glad to have you here. Dark Dry Drew had a great holiday, so he told me before we got started. So I'm going to just confirm that. Drew, how'd it go? I mean, you have a good holiday, good Christmas?
Yeah, it's always overwhelming for me to be around lots of people, but I appreciated getting all of that opportunity to see everyone, especially because a lot of family is going to be moving out of state. So. Oh,
really?
Yeah,
wow.
It was a good time. What about you?
It was a different Christmas, as anyone who tuned into this morning's podcast with Joel found out. I told the story of how we spent Christmas because if you want to listen to the whole story, you want to go play that episode. It's entitled Louise's Christmas Miracle. But we spent Christmas Eve in the hospital. And the short version of the story is Louise had something known as AFib, or atrial fibrillation, which is basically the heartbeat but beating out of sync, the stuff firing in the wrong order and so forth. And long story short, after a bunch of medication and some attempts and so forth, at around 10:30 at night on Christmas Eve, she was asleep, and in her sleep, her heart stopped for about 5 seconds, reset itself like a reboot of a computer, and when it came back, it was beating a normal sinus rhythm, and everything was improving by leaps and bounds. So that's why we're calling it our Christmas miracle, because it all happened on Christmas. She found out actually Christmas morning, about 2.5 hours later, because it was actually pretty cool the way the thing happened. Because, when you're in the hospital, they got you all wired up, so they can monitor you from the nurse's station, right? And all of a sudden she flatlines, and everybody in the nurse's station, their eyes shoot over to the board. What's happening here? And her nurse, who knew what was going on, said, "Wait for it." And 5 seconds later, it kicked into gear, and they all started celebrating, cheers, and passing drinks around and high fives and so forth. And she went to tell Louise, saw Louise was asleep and knew she needed to sleep. And she also knew she was going to have to wake her a couple hours later because she'd have to take blood pressure and give meds and all that kind of stuff. So she waited till 1 a.m. on Christmas Day and woke her up and told her the great news, and Louise could hardly even go back to sleep after that. So it was very exciting.
Yeah. Well, that is wonderful. I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah, we were too. And she is improving tremendously. I mean, since that happened, she's remained in sinus rhythm, which means she's gotten a lot of her strength back that she didn't have before. Lots of good things happening. Just yesterday and today, we went out and did some shopping. And in the last couple of months, if we had done that, one store for 15 minutes would have wiped her out, and she would have had to take a 6-hour nap. This time, we did like 4 or 5 stores in a row. Everything was fine, no big deal. Today, she was a little tired after like 3 or 4 stops, but a huge improvement compared to where we've been the last couple of months. So
awesome.
It wasn't exactly the best way to spend Christmas, but the result was fabulous. And so, like we said, we're calling it our Christmas miracle because it really was. So
yeah.
Well,
that's wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to hear that.
So am I. Look at my face.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, we don't really have a firm topic worked up for today. We are inviting people to leave questions, so if anyone has any questions who are listening to the live stream and either on our Facebook page, the LOA Today page, or in the Facebook Law of Attraction Changed My Life Could Be the One. If you are listening to the live stream, feel free to plug in your questions, and we'll be glad to answer them. But I figured we could kind of just continue what we were talking about last week, Drew, because last week we were kind of exploring some stuff that is pretty pertinent to most young people today. And I'll kind of along that same line, I'm trying to think where the context was for what I'm about to talk about. But, I know what it was. It was a conversation with Bill G., who I used to do an online radio show on PRN, which is where this is also broadcast as a recorded show each time. But on PRN about 8 years ago. And it was not on the topic of law of attraction. It was on politics and news and all this other stuff. And we both kind of burned out on it and gave up, and that's when I decided to do the LOA Today more permanently. But he was on the show this past Sunday, and during that show, he and I were kind of talking about, well, actually after the show, he and I were kind of talking about what it is that people are looking for from podcasts these days. And he mentioned that his son is big time into online gaming. And in fact, he is one of the people who likes to go to places that are showing somebody playing an online game and then kind of talking with their friends as they're doing it. Apparently, this is a big thing these days. Thousands of people will tune into some of these shows. And I was intrigued by that because I didn't really know what was going on there. But his son does it, so I was kind of picking his brain. And he said, it's an interesting thing that the reason that the kids are tuning into this stuff, to just watch somebody play a video game, is because if they keep it light, everything is light. Everything is just, there's nothing. There are no heavy topics. I mean, the moment anybody tries to talk about politics, everybody stops watching. That kind of thing. It's all just very, very light. And the reason it's light, and I thought this was a great insight. He says the reason it's light is because the kids who are tuning into it have so much being loaded on them these days through the educational system, through the changes in technology, changes that families have been going through. You add it all up, and they're feeling a tremendous amount of pressure. So they need a release valve. They don't like anything about television, so they don't want to watch television. So they're going on to YouTube or Facebook or whatever, and just tuning in and watching somebody play a video game that they like to play, and listening to the commentary, and just enjoying the fact that because there's nothing heavy going on, it's all an escape. And I thought, wow, that's really something. Because kind of in a sense, that's what we're doing. We do get into some issues sometimes, not so much politics, but we talk about people who have trouble manifesting stuff, or just some basic life issues, that kind of thing. But apparently, the lighter that we keep it, the better. So I'm kind of trying to take that to heart and say, okay, well, what can we do to keep this program as light as we can every single time that we do one?
Well, my opinion's the exact opposite.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well,
tell me, because I'm definitely not a millennial, so I need to know.
And that's part of the reason that the reason that I mostly connect with people age 50 plus is because I've always in a lot of ways I've always been ahead, in a lot of ways I've always been behind my age group.
Okay.
But a lot of the people my age and a lot of people in general do not like deep, heavy topics. But to me, these are the pertinent questions that they are tough to deal with, and they're something. For me, the past 6 months has just been constant. It's this perpetual trip into the abyss and examining all these things about my life. But and a lot of people get scared off by that. They're not willing to go into the abyss. But then when you've been in there long enough and you don't ask, why are things terrible? Why and this, that, but instead, how can I get out of here? Once you know the problem, then it's the how do you fix it? And you begin ascending this mountain. And I recently got to the top of one of those mountains. And of course, once you get to the top of one mountain, you'll see that there are procedurally more and more mountains that get higher and higher and higher, and you have to go back down and continually changing your life. But I'd say that this program's strength is that it's able to go into deeper, heavier topics, but remain optimistic about it. And rather than being an escape, it's a guiding light for people who are in heavy times, because there's already enough. Everyone's already trying to escape, but no one's willing to face difficult issues for the most part. And sometimes a lot of people have to be forced into it through a big life crisis, through, the end of a relationship, a death, or some, life-changing event. So I would say that, depending on who's having a good mix. Whenever you and I talk, I'm kind of, to some degree, I'm a pretty nihilistic person, but I'm also really optimistic. And that's
you're the first person I've ever talked to who described himself as nihilistic. And I've known about nihilism for quite some time, but I don't think I ever knew anybody who self-identified that way. So that's fascinating.
And my friends have called me that too, or they're like,
oh really?
They're like, you are a nihilist, aren't you? And I'm like, well, yes, but it's to some degree, it's my personality type. a lot of people with my personality type, INTJ, I kind of have this approach where in my head I can envision a perfect reality, but then the actual reality we're in is never perfect. And so there's always this sort of disconnect between the way that I want to make things, the way that I wish things were, but then the way they actually are. And so in my head, everything is incredibly optimistic, and I'm always pushing for the best and trying to, to fix all the problems and to take on all of these issues that are challenging and heavy. For me, it's more fulfilling to not escape, although escape is necessary. But with a program like this, for me, it's not a time to escape. It's a time to dig deeper. And then with you, and then of course everyone else involved, I suppose it's like a support group to some degree. At least that's the way I perceive. Kind of like in the way that Alcoholics Anonymous functions, of like all these people dealing with a common issue. Here it's all of us with the law of attraction focus, but for a lot of people, you don't go to the law of attraction if your life's already good. That wouldn't occur to you. Like, it's something that you had to have gotten into because things weren't good, and that you're trying to fix that.
Well, that's true.
And that's kind of what drew me to it. Was that for years, depression and medical issues and all this stuff, to the point where, now I'm like, okay, I'm starting to understand the power of positivity, the law of attraction, aligning my life with all of this. So I would encourage that, my opinion would be that, if certain hosts prefer to, or co-hosts prefer to keep it light, and that's their approach to do that, but to kind of, suss out which each person's plan is and kind of what they're getting out of it, or what, because what I want out of this show, and what for my own self, and then to create, our unique perspectives, kind of create this, I guess you could call it a product essentially, but we're creating this thing that we're presenting to other people. And so the combination that we have, optimistic nihilism is what I call it.
Okay.
And I even made a little short film about that, and no one seemed to understand they're like, what the hell is optimistic nihilism? Like, what does that mean?
So what is it? I mean, define it. Tell us what you think optimistic nihilism is.
So I have the way my brain works is there's problems and solutions, and then I function in systems. And so when I look at the world, like let's say I go to a concert, sometimes I can just fully be in the moment and just take it in for exactly what it is. But a lot of the time I'm very caught up in my head, and that's kind of, somewhat personality type, and then years of me kind of finding fulfillment in that. But at the same time, that of course can be kind of damaging when it can pull you out of the moment, and it kind of, the emotional side can suffer more, where you want to have a good balance of just, thinking and logic, but then also the emotions. So if you're all on one, then you can kind of be out of tune essentially. So for me, the optimistic side is the side that keeps pushing forward. The side that's like, I'm going to make all these films, I'm going to do all this comedy, I'm going to, fix all my health problems, all this stuff. But then the nihilistic side is sort of the thing that kind of grounds me in realism, and like, okay, I do have to accept the fact that like I have a perpetual medical problem that will always be a challenge, and that a lot of the world's pretty grim, and that no matter, there's a good chance that all of my efforts can fail, which could be out of my control even. And so there's all these other things I take into account. And so in that regard, it's often nihilistic. And then like with my friend last night, we were discussing all of these things about the future. He was talking about basically gene editing, and how, say, thousands of years from now, it would be advanced enough that you could splice from like different animals and human DNA. So you could potentially grow back your arm if you had like, a gecko DNA. They found that aspect. And I was like, well, that's very optimistic of you. I have a much more nihilistic approach. I do not think that most people would use gene editing for the good. But I see the potential for the good, but I don't think it would happen. And so that's kind of my, that is like a light version, I guess, of the optimistic nihilism.
That's interesting, because nihilism is generally rejection of like religious and moral principles in general, and what you're describing actually seems to be a certain embracing of them in some sense, although not in the typical sense. Am I misreading this?
It's a mix, and that's why I have to specify that it's not just nihilism, because it's optimistic nihilism. Because pure nihilism is toxic. But it's like, it's not optimism with the side of nihilism, it's nihilism with the side of optimism. Although I try and get it like 50-50 if I can. And that's kind of what, it's just enough, because to me, especially with like, for instance, a lot of like motivational speakers, self-help kind of stuff, a lot of it's just like, think positive and it'll fix all your problems. Or, do this and your life will be better. And to me, it was always like, that's a bunch of BS. Like, all these people pretend that life is great, but like most of the time, you're always facing new challenges and problems, whether it be with friends, family, your own life, whatever it is. And so I like to have a more grounded approach in like accepting the, the challenging, the difficult, all of these like things that are unpleasant, but then kind of pushing through all of that. So it's kind of like just this train is the optimism, and it's just pushing through all of this trash, which is all of the nihilistic side, and it's blasting through it. But it's kind of just accepting the fact that it's all there, and being like, okay, we have to anticipate all of this.
Okay. So I guess it's part of, I guess what you're describing then is a growth philosophy, which is not really what typically nihilism is, but it's a growth philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, the terminology, I suppose, is flexible. For me, that's what makes the most sense, is calling it optimistic nihilism.
Okay.
I suppose it could be, this is kind of a side tangent or whatever, but essentially words only have purpose if they convey meaning. And so,
that's true.
The titles are irrelevant, essentially. It's just kind of a placeholder for my own self and to kind of convey that to people.
Well, I mean, you certainly made some good points, and I'm wondering if there might be like a common ground to draw both of them. I mean, on the one hand, somebody who's just looking for escapism, you really can't do able to help them escape unless they're in a headspace where they can actually look at the problems. And then now it's not just escapism, now it's actually addressing problems head on. By the way, do you have a headset or something? Because I'm hearing my echo coming back to me as I'm talking, and that's not making good audio.
I do have a headset on. Is it not coming? Does it sound weird?
Somehow I'm getting an echo. Maybe it's not going on to the tape, and actually it's just canceled out. So maybe the filtering is taking care of that. So we'll just assume that it's okay.
Everything sounds fine on my side.
Okay. Well, then let's go with it for now. I mean, I heard the echo. Maybe I'm just hearing it. Maybe it's not going on to the recording. So we'll just kind of go with that for now.
Okay.
But I'm wondering, though, is there a way, I know you can't actually make somebody want to address their issues. That's kind of obvious, really. But I'm wondering if there is a way to draw somebody in based on the idea that it is an escape. And, oh, by the way, while you're escaping, you're also going to learn some stuff about yourself. And I don't know if that actually works together or not, but I kind of like it, too, because it'd be great to, reach a larger audience that way. What do you think?
I don't. I think that certain hosts would be good for escaping, and certain hosts would be good for not escaping.
You don't think there's much of an overlap then?
And also, I think that the inherent nature of the show is discussion, which requires thinking, and the reason that most people like YouTube and Twitch, which are the main streaming things for games,
right?
The reason they like those is because it's simple. All you have to do is sit there and watch. It's like Coors Light at a party. Like, everyone can drink Coors because it almost tastes like water. If you were to bring some obscure German import, it might be very, very quality, but you have to get to the point where you appreciate that. And so, with escapism, I think that a lot of times.
Well, it's sort of like television without the commercials and without the crazy dramas. It's basically it's still watching something and just being the observer rather than having to actually participate in some way.
I understand the importance of escapism. I don't think that this show would provide escapism for young people as much. I know most of my friends like to watch the gaming because, like you said, you just watch someone kind of fiddle around. They don't talk about politics. They don't talk
No.
about trouble at home.
It's just
A lot of people already have trouble at home and trouble with politics and trouble with their own life. And then furthermore, a lot of people like to blame most of the problems on external things. And
true.
I believe that most people's problems are their own fault and their family's fault. And after that, once you can kind of address those things, then you can take on a lot of the external problems. Because there's always going to be external problems, whether it be, you know, people treating you poorly based on what you look like or where you come from, or just the fact that you grew up in a certain area. You know, if you're born in Cape Town, South Africa, like right now is not a good time to be there. But 50 years ago, maybe it was better. Or like where I grew up, this town has gotten immensely better, and then all the gentrification of the day changed everything. So it's one of those things where like everything's changing, and so that has to be taken into account as well, you know, kind of.
But you also mentioned fault,
ponder.
and one of the themes that we like to talk about here, and I talk about this with a lot of my co-hosts, is the idea that finding fault actually is not our best strategy, even if it's finding fault with ourselves, maybe even especially if it's finding fault with ourselves. Because when we're finding fault, what we're saying is, here's what's wrong. Here's what I don't like about what's going on in my life, and I'm going to tell you the story about what's going on in my life that I don't like, and I'm going to keep telling the story of what's going wrong in my life. And we know what kind of result that produces. So I'm wondering if maybe we need to reframe in some way to make it clear that we're not trying to find fault, we're trying to find ways to live with what's going on and to feel good about what's going on. Because when we can find ways to feel good about what's going on, it's not about whether I'm at fault, somebody else is at fault, or pointing fingers or whatever. It's about how can I find a better way to feel. Is there a way to feel good about what's going on? Or if not to feel good about what's going on, is there a way to refocus so that I'm not as drawn into the craziness of what's going on, and I'm now focusing on something else that's a better thing and a more pleasant thing, and something that is more, you know, in tune with what it is that I really want in my life. Because that's what really happens. We get caught up in talk about trying to escape dramas. We're trying to escape dramas for a very good reason. Dramas aren't fun. I mean, they're kind of interesting to watch in a movie, but when you're living them, they're not really fun at all. So escape is certainly one thing we want to do, but I think ultimately what we want to do is we want to learn how to look at things differently so we don't experience it as a drama.
Yeah, and I agree that the strategy should not be to find all the faults. The first step, though, is finding the faults, because you can't align your life, with like the law of attraction, where you're trying to align everything towards your goals. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what the faults are, so that's why I like to look at the faults first. Because I was explaining this to my friend, because he and I, for years, had the same problem. We're always asking why. Why does my life suck? Why,
right.
Why don't I meet the people that blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to ask that many whys to really get down to what your problem is. And generally the answer is that you are your own problem in all cases, and it's about restructuring your brain. But you do have to ask the why first. It's like if you're digging in the ground, and every time you dig in, that's a why. And it only takes a couple times of digging to be like, oh, there's no toxic waste here. Mm-hmm. Well, now you no longer ask why, because asking why is just digging more. If you keep digging 10 feet over and 10 feet over and 10 feet over, you still have waste there and there and there. Maybe over here you're like, oh, there's actually no toxic. That why did not lead to a negative. But basically, you only have to ask a couple whys, like why am I so depressed all the time? That was the why. Mm-hmm. Then for me, it's like, well, I know why. Like, I knew why my life was depressed. It didn't take much to think about. But then, and this is where the law of attraction came in, it was how. How can I make my life better? Because when you reframe it, that's the strategy, what you're talking about, right? Where you reframe it, so it's how can I make my life better? And when you ask yourself things in a positive way or a negative way, your brain will come up with millions of answers. Like they'll just start pouring out. And that's what happened to me. Was I'd been asking why and why and why, all these terrible things, and I was getting terrible answers, and it kept dragging me down, and I kept digging into this toxic waste, and the farther I dig in there, the harder it's going to get. And so I started asking how. And once I started asking how, it was, well, how about we go to bed at midnight and, wake up at 8? How about we stretch morning and night? How about I carry a water bottle and a book everywhere I go, so I'm not looking at my phone? And once you start asking yourself, how can I make it better? How can I change this? it all just like comes together at once. That was for me an enormous revelation that my mom had even told me this years ago, and my dad had told me this. It's one of the things you have to experience yourself. You have to be so entrenched in the toxic waste that you get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, I finally get it. It's no longer worth asking why. It's now worth asking how. Like, it's basically like you look up and you realize you're deep in this pit. And so I agree that you definitely do not want to always be looking at the faults, because that's what I did, and it just drags you down. But you do have to first, it's like with any addiction, you have to recognize the problem. It's okay, I'm drinking too much. Then from there, if you keep asking, furthermore, well, why do I do this? And, it goes on and on. But reframing that, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. And what you're really describing is, I think I might change the way you phrase it. You say finding fault. I wouldn't say it as finding fault. I would say identifying what you don't like. Because there's no fault in identifying what you don't like. So I don't like that X is going on in my life, and X seems to repeatedly go on in my life. Okay, good. Identify what you don't like. And the good thing about identifying what we don't like is that we have just, by saying it or thinking, feeling it, or expressing it some way, at that moment in time, we have simultaneously sent off what Abraham calls that rocket of desire about what we do want instead. And then here's the really interesting thing. Yeah. We send off this sort of rocket of desire. We have this expression of here's what I want instead, but we don't actually say it much of the time. Or we don't actually think about it, or we don't actually feel it. It's like we know it's there. We know that there's this other thing that we would really prefer instead, but we don't spend a lot of time on it. In fact, usually we spend no time on it. And then we wonder why it is that we keep experiencing the bad stuff, which is kind of ironic, I think. You know what I mean? I mean, it seems like we should just follow up, but we don't. It's almost like we have a broken record that goes on inside of ourselves, and in that broken record, it's like we have this compulsion to keep talking about all the stuff that keeps happening over and over again to us that we don't like, and say, yeah, I definitely don't like it. I still don't like it. I still don't like it. But all I have to do is just say, well, here's what I like. Here's the part that I really like. I would love this. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if this happened? Wouldn't it be nice if that happened? And I think I know what part of the reason why is. Part of the reason is there's no drama in Wouldn't It Be Nice If. There's plenty of drama in here are all the things that are going wrong, but there's no drama at all in Wouldn't It Be Nice If it worked this way. You've expressed it, and you're done. Yeah. So
that's definitely got to be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a huge part of it, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have so much trouble as individuals shifting over to that new perspective. Because I've identified what my new perspective is. My new perspective is I really like life better when I don't fight with my father, or when my girlfriend and I get along, or when, happy wife, happy life, or whatever it is. Yeah. And then that's it, because I've just expressed it. We have to learn how to express beyond that. We have to learn how to kind of replay it and turn it into a new tape loop that replaces that old dramatic loop. That's what's so difficult, because it's not dramatic. It's just feel good. Okay, that feels good. I like that.
Yeah. I think we're also creatures that, habit inherently.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to get, if you've been negative for years, like I was, then that switch is like, I literally had to restructure my brain, and I had to hit like the rock bottom, and then even go beyond the rock bottom that I thought I'd been at. Like, you just keep descending, because the quote is, hell is a bottomless pit. Because as far down as you are, there's plenty of ways to go even further down. And that's where I was at, and it's like, oh my gosh, I finally realized that. So definitely what you're saying, and then also, I think a lot of people don't like to allow, I don't quite figure this out, but a lot of people allow themselves to be happy. And even I have had trouble with this through time, where I feel the need to be doing something productive. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times that's a societal thing, that's kind of been, we've been brainwashed to, because in Europe, in America, one of the first questions someone will ask you is, so what do you do? Mm. And what you tell them that you do, oh, I'm a fry cook, or oh, I'm a scientist, they'll judge you based on that. But in another country like Europe, for instance, people do not base their entire character on the work they're doing necessarily. It's more holistic in that they're, oh, I'm a painter, and I like to go ride my bike, and all these other things. And so in America, there's sort of this societal pressure that if you're not being productive, you're a loser, you're a deadbeat. And I think that's kind of been brainwashed to some degree through even, that's the thing is like, it's pretty easy for a few ads and propaganda pieces to subtly, or even just in the films. It all kind of compounds, and then in the films, the characters act this way, and the cartoons they act this way, and all the role models you see out there, or who you think are role models, they act that way, and your parents act that way, so then you act that way. So then you get to a point where you read, and this is sort of, and this is something, okay, I've been thinking this a bunch, because I talked about, with my friend last night. People in the past are always becoming obsolete because everything else is changing. And you have to continually adapt. You're one of the people that's adapting. You're getting my perspective, you're getting these other co-hosts from different age ranges. You're hearing all these different perspectives. But I know a lot of, like my grandparents, or like even age 40 range, age 40 plus, a lot of people kind of go stagnant and sort of are entrenched in the time period. And that's sort of, I mean, that's sort of the whole survival of the fittest is just the survival of the most adaptable. So you're having, I mean, everything that people thought in the early 1900s, some of it is still relevant, but a lot of it is oriented and backwards in today's views. I think that all of today is going to have that same effect. That's sort of like a perpetual thing. But I think that each sort of era kind of has its own merits. And some of that is forever lost. We're seeing degradation of family values and sort of like a consolidated, religious beliefs to where now there's so many different beliefs that there's not really a clear path for everyone. And so a lot of people are lost. And so there's so much to look at. And at first it's like we're saying, where there's that, at first it's the, why is this bad? What do I not like? Figure out what it is that's not feeling right. And then after that, you frame it in a positive way of how can I make this better? Well, if you're upset with the politics, how can you feel better? What can you do to make things better in your own life? A lot of times it's so easy to get caught up in looking at, all the political stuff right now. Like it feels like it's going to have a big impact on us, and it will gradually over time often have a big impact. But in the day-to-day life, a lot of people are so entrenched in what they think about the politics that it tortures them day after day. And what I realized is that most of the external issues you can just forget about. They don't really have a big impact. It's still worth knowing about them so that you can have a better understanding of the world, a better understanding of other people and their background and why they are the way they are. But a lot of people they kind of get stuck in it, and it makes you wonder if they actually like it, or they enjoy the drama, right?
So, I like a lot of what you're talking about there. I actually want to take issue with a couple of points, though. One thing I want to take issue with is the idea that family values are deteriorating. I don't think they're deteriorating at all. I think that family values, as expressed by conservatives, is basically gone. In fact, I'm not even sure that what they envision in their mind actually existed. But take away the political context and just look at what happens with people and their families. I think family values are as strong or even stronger than ever before. It's just that they've evolved. They're quite different from where they were even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And in the process of evolving, they're actually evolving for the better. I don't have a whole lot of in-person personal contact with people who are raising families today, but I see enough of it to be able to see there's some really big improvements that are going on. Are families perfect now? No, they're not anywhere close to perfect. I doubt that they ever will be. But I'm seeing, when I compare to like when I was growing up, or when I compare it to like the 80s when I was watching Kids Up On as a young man, I see huge improvements. Some things that aren't so good, but a lot of stuff that's really good. So I would say family values are even more powerful than they ever were before. I think it's just a question of how you decide to look at it. But I agree with what you're talking about in terms of the way that when we look closer at the stuff that we don't like and pay more attention to noticing it does get us to ask questions. And that I think is actually a strength, because the more we ask those questions, the more open I think we potentially become, if we are truly open to learning stuff from this, the more open we become to identifying how do we get to where we want to be. Because the old rules clearly don't work. Most of them really don't work very well. That's what we learned. That's what the generations have learned. The one that I grew up with, that my parents grew up with, that their parents grew up with, was put your nose to the grindstone and work hard, and you'll have a successful life. And it's not true. I mean, it's not that it's never true. It is sometimes true. Some people are able to get there, but a lot of people aren't. So the rule is not as hard and fast as it used to be. And that's a good thing. I see that as a very good thing. It's generational in a sense.
I will have to be exposed to more people before I could make a definitive opinion on either side.
Okay.
In regards to family and what you just said. But I think generally if there's two differing opinions, the reality is probably somewhere in between.
Oh, yeah.
That's from what I've learned. I suppose maybe then it's not entirely the degradation of family values, but more the fact that it's no longer as consolidated. There's not, because in the 50s and stuff, you have this sort of like American dream and the nuclear family and stuff like that.
You know what the funny thing about the 50s was? The 50s was a lie. The 50s was a great big lie.
Yeah.
It was a lie even then.
Yeah?
It was not real. It was never real. Father Knows Best was never real.
Yeah.
The Brady Bunch was never real. Never ever. It did not represent the way families actually were. It was a myth. It was a myth created by, in this case, by Hollywood and by the American television networks. But it was a myth. It didn't actually exist.
Yeah, and I've been curious about that. I've only had a few people to ever ask, but that's interesting to hear. And I do agree that the idea of the American dream itself is a myth as well, where, when you look at a lot of the stuff, it was like pretty clearly, even the education system changed so much so that a lot of what I learned was memorizing things and doing kind of grinding work. Mm-hmm. And it was basically setting all of us up to go work at factories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of these people my age, they don't actually have any critical thinking skills, no emotional skills, no empathy. These aren't things that were taught by their family because their family wasn't taught that, and their family wasn't taught that, and so it goes back and back. And so that's where I say that, people's parents and their own selves are responsible for a lot of it, and essentially their whole lineage and then the circumstances, the time periods they were in. And then, so that's sort of, and then the whole, America's a big pot, and there's tons of valuable things that come out of that, but tons of things that aren't so valuable, where there's a lot of conflict in beliefs, and so it's kind of hard, especially hard, actually, to kind of have a nuanced approach and to find a middle ground where it's like, okay, you believe that, I believe this, let's kind of find a good thing in the middle, because right now it's super polarized, and that's what's really frustrating to me, is it's like I'm trying in my own life to reach out to people.
But you know what, though?
It's
really only polarized in politics. Take politics out of this discussion and look, because politics is really actually a very inaccurate looking glass to look at society in. It really doesn't represent what goes on in life very well at all. It's kind of like trying to look at society through the news. The news is a terrible lens to look at, trying to understand how society is. If you look at society through the lens of the news, you basically come to the conclusion that society is this horrible, toxic pit, to use your words. It's just this horrible thing. But you actually look at society, and it really isn't that at all. There is that in there, but it's not like every town is living under a threat of a terror attack. You would kind of think they were because of what the news talks about.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the case. You can probably count on like the seventh or eighth decimal point how many people in the United States have actually been touched by a terror attack. I don't mean to take away from the fact that people have been touched by it, and clearly it's traumatic and horrible to go through it. But the vast majority of people have never been touched by a terror attack, not directly. They've seen it on television, they've been traumatized in that sense. But in terms of being personally touched by it, very, very few people have been touched by it. So the news lens is a really lousy lens to understand what goes on in society. Look away from politics, look away from news, look away from all that, and get a much better picture, I think. So I'd say throw that clarity thing out the window. This polarized society thing is not a polarized society, it's a polarized landscape, a political landscape. But the political landscape is just one small piece of society, and it's one that you can just dismiss. It's not that important.
And I'll have to explore that more, because for me, my friends last night, we discussed it. So I've got a group that we've been friends since high school, middle school, but we all live different places, so we'll meet up 1 to 3 times a year, and last night was that. And And it's been interesting that when in high school, my friend and I were like super liberal, and then my other two friends were like super conservative, and now we're kind of all in the middle. And I do think a lot of people are definitely, I think people that actually take the time to think about it and kind of get their news from different sources and have different people from different walks of life in their own life, essentially. I think those kind of people are in the middle, and then the people that don't really kind of put the effort into it, they just kind of take things as it is, those people would be polarized. But yeah, that's a good point.
But there's also another group that you're not taking into account, and that's the group that doesn't pay any attention to the news. And that's actually a more significant size group than you may realize. But that group has learned the valuable lesson that there is no value in strictly following the news. I mean, the news is not good for you. It's really, really bad for you, actually. You try to avoid it as possible. And, some people feel like, well, I have to at least stay informed. Okay. You can inform yourself if you really want to. You better put your guard up because you're going to get hit with a lot of distortions and mistruths. But at least don't inundate yourself with it. Don't constantly be absorbing it and using that as your looking glass to understand the world, because all you're going to do is get depressed. And this is not a new thing. Yeah. This has been going on for generations. It's because of the nature of news and also the nature of politics. The nature of news is to show the worst things that go on in life because they're the most dramatic, because that's how you get audience to sell advertising. And the same thing is true in politics. It's just having a different take on it. Politics is all about showing people the worst things in the world to scare them to death so that they can vote for you. But it's basically the same game. There is really not a lot of difference between the two games. One has one kind of currency, the other has the other kind of currency. One uses that currency, one uses both. But otherwise, they're the same thing. And neither one is good for you. Neither one will give you knowledge. Neither one will improve your life. Neither one will really give you anything of value. Of positive value, anyway. It'll give you a lot of negative value. But it won't give you anything of positive value.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'll have to, I've tried to stay away from the news. I know I'll hear my mom gasp, and she's like, oh my gosh. And I just like, don't even tell me. I don't even want to hear. I want to hear about children being hurt and, all these horrible things. It's like, don't.
I have to admit, I still watch some news. I don't watch a lot of it. I certainly don't watch television. I get my news from Google headlines. That's it. Maybe I'll read an article or two. And I'll only allow myself to watch it from the perspective of wanting to laugh, of wanting to find it to be just perplexingly laughable. Because it is. So much of it is perplexingly laughable. Yeah. But the moment that I find myself getting sucked in and feeling the angst of it and so forth, that's when I know it's time to shut off the computer, make sure the TV is off, make sure all the news is turned off, and just leave it off for a while because I'm being toxically affected by it. And even that's a dangerous road to play. You're actually better off just turning it off entirely. In fact, I can probably tell you which of the co-hosts, most of the co-hosts actually don't listen to news at all. Believe it or not. Joel hasn't listened to a newscast in 2 years that I know of. Cindy, the same thing. She doesn't. Cindy does listen to a little bit of political news, but not probably more than she should. But for the most part, she just ignores most of it. Just doesn't pay any attention to it. Wendy Dillard, when she was doing it with me, she basically ignored the news. Tom Wells pays a little attention, but not so much, kind of for the same reasons that you do, because you have friends who are, strongly interested in political issues or news issues or whatever. And so he wants to be able to communicate with those friends. But even he's finding those friends are kind of disappearing. And for good reason, because they're still caught up in that cycle of all the negativity going on. And he's saying, I don't really want to focus on all that negativity. And so he's finding his friendship circle is changing, which I think probably resonates with you.
Yeah, that's definitely been my life the past year, no doubt, and kind of just continuing onward. I suppose, and part of the problem for me is that I very rarely deeply connect with anyone at all, only maybe a handful in my entire life. So finding new people is always a challenge, but just finding people that this thing is finding people to fulfill certain things. Like I've got certain friends for certain activities, but finding deep friendships, that's kind of the thing where it can be tough to hold on to them when they do thing, where they kind of do just kind of stagnate and get so entrenched in the negativity that's like, I just can't have this in my life. And, And that's kind of where the law of attraction thing comes in. Sometimes you have to make a really tough decision to align your life with where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, I've definitely been everything you're saying. Yeah, the news, I try not to look at it ever. I only recently was trying to look into it just in terms of kind of having a better understanding of the global climate. But even then, it's just...
One of the things that's helpful...
I think added it.
No, it doesn't add anything. One of the things I think is valuable is understanding that when other countries look at the United States, for instance, they look at the U.S. government and they have one opinion. They look at the people, the Americans, and they have a different opinion. If they just meet, the typical American, I mean, there are some people who are going to be just prejudiced against Americans, and that's fine, that happens. But most people in other countries, when they're interacting with an American, they don't think of them as being the U.S. government. They just think of them as being Americans. And in my experience, Americans tend to be fairly well liked. But the U.S. government is hated. It's completely hated.
Yeah.
And for good reason. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. It's terrible. Okay. Well, what that means is that in terms of the global picture as it's usually presented, in the global picture, Americans are terrible. But the global picture is based on what the U.S. government does. Whereas if you take a new picture, so to speak, and look at the world from the perspective of just people, and in this case Americans as people, then the whole picture takes on a different shape entirely. It's like looking at France right now. France is dealing with a number of protests, the yellow vest protests, right, where they're protesting the policies of the French president. And if you understand France in that lens, it's a very limited lens, and through that lens, it looks like France is in chaos right now. But I guarantee you, if you fly over to France right now and just, walk down the Champs-Elysees in Paris or take a trip down one of the rivers on a river cruise or whatever, you won't see any of that. It's not what you're going to find. You're going to just find French people living French lives the way that they have for a long, long time, using modern technologies and such, but basically just people living their lives. They're going to be nice people. They're going to be good people. Well, some of them won't like Americans, but a lot of them will. And you'll just find it's a different experience from what you saw on the news. So I wouldn't worry about what's going on in the global picture, because the global picture isn't accurate. The global picture is actually as far from accurate as you can get. It's very inaccurate.
Yeah.
It's not representative of what's going on at all. That global picture is a fiction.
Distortion.
Yeah, it's a fiction. It's a fiction that's been created by the newsies, by the politicians, by all the people who want to sell drama to us. Saying, oh my God, you should be fearing this, you should be angry about this, you should be frustrated about this, you should be, organizing about it, you should become a political activist, you should, take your stance and stand firm against this terrible thing that's going on. That's what they're selling. And they are not representative of what life is. They aren't even close, really.
Yeah.
They actually missed the mark by a lot. And by the way, I had mentioned Deidre has been posting up a storm saying how she definitely does not, she likes to stay away from those who have no values, and she has, I think she also said she likes staying away from the news. Yeah, she tries not to watch or follow the news. So, good for you, Deidre. Oh, Deidre also has a message for you, Drew. She says, Drew, my mom is the same way. She tries to tell me all this horrible stuff, and it really sickens me. I think about there someday being a TV network of good news. For all I know, there already is such a thing. I think that's actually what the dream of LOA today is, to become a podcast / video network of good news.
and that's where I guess full circle we come back to the idea of, should you make the program light? I think that through these discussion of deep topics and challenging things, I think every episode so far we've always come to a positive conclusion, or a positive way to frame it, or sort of one thing that you could do or that I could do to change, the daily life to be better. And so, I totally agree. I think that what you're looking to achieve, your program already achieves.
Mm-hmm.
I would not suggest doing anything else.
I am aware of the value of staying light, and I think it's what my conversation with Bill told me. So basically, stay on the light side. The light side it's the side that's going to make it easier for somebody who's trying to escape to pay attention to you. because the nature of escapism is to literally turn off all the drama. It doesn't really have a positive agenda. Because like you said, somebody who's watching a video game, they don't really care to participate in any way. They just want to watch somebody else play a video game and talk about nothing of any great importance so they can just get away from all the drama. But it doesn't actually promote a positive viewpoint. It just gets away from a negative one. It's kind of like being a neutral.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
that's, I think a lot of people like to just have sound in the background too, so they don't feel lonely.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I even have trouble with this, but I don't like silence. I had a ringing in my ears for a long period of time because I go to a lot of concerts, but it's kind of gotten better. And so now silence, I've learned to appreciate silence more. But definitely, I understand why people do, escape. I just found that when I got into that stage, which was drugs and alcohol and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's common ways.
It was just a short period of time before I was like, no, this went downhill really fast, like just in a matter of weeks.
Yep.
And I just quickly just cut it out. Like, no, that's not at all.
Well, good for
I
you.
think a lot of people don't. Yeah, it was. Unfortunately, I have a supporting family that was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, I think a lot of people don't have that, or they don't have, a lot of people aren't taught how to make tough decisions. And that's another thing that's kind of factored into what we're talking about, of like, not following politics, not getting caught up in the drama. That's a tough decision. It sounds easy, because in your head, it's like, oh, I'll just, start aligning myself, and it's not necessarily being positive, but it's becoming a positive being, and that's how I like to look at it. And a lot of people sort of seem to have trouble. I know I had trouble with that, because it sounds so simple on paper. That's like advice. You can have a fortune for the bold. It sounds so simple when you say it just in several words. And in real life, it's very intimidating. It's very challenging. It's always different depending on the situation you're in.
Right.
But learning to take, I know for me, I have to take small steps. So for me, I always had a problem with like approaching people I've never talked to before and then trying to talk to them.
Yeah.
And so it was easiest to just talk to very, very normal people about mundane things. And then I could go approach people, build it up and up and up. And now it's like getting to the point where I can generally walk up to someone if I'm feeling, confident or whatever, and just start talking to them. It's sort of building. So I think a lot of people will try and make the positive changes, but they want to expect everything to happen a lot faster than it really will, which is my experience. And
we live in an instant gratification world. I mean, we now live in a where you have the world at your fingertips on a smartphone or on a laptop or something like that, and if the laptop doesn't load the search results in less than 2 seconds, you've lost interest. I mean, that's instant gratification generation. So that's actually a relatively new phenomenon. It's been going on since before technology. I think what happened with technology is just kind of made it more obvious. But the desire for instant gratification has been around for a long, long time. And yet, even in the course of all that instant gratification need happening, you get to a point in life, and it can vary from one person to the next where you're going to reach that point. But you get to a point where you say, you know what? I keep going for instant gratification. It doesn't get me anywhere. It doesn't actually satisfy anything. And I think that's where the opening is for something like our program. Because now we're going a step beyond instant gratification. In fact, we're going any steps beyond it. But the initial thrust of it, the idea of a law of attraction, that's a step beyond law of instant gratification, because you can understand the basic concept, and your first reaction is, well, I wanted to have things all my life and they never showed up, so therefore this stuff doesn't work. But if you happen to be a person who's willing to, delve a little bit deeper just to see, is there something to this? That action of going a little bit deeper starts taking you out of the instant gratification realm, because now you're looking deeper. The moment you look deeper is the moment you're not looking at instant gratification anymore. So once again, I see it as a good thing. And
I agree.
This is where the concept of pivoting is in. You pivot away from the stuff that you're stuck, right? That's what Abraham teaches us. You pivot over to something that feels better, something that is more continuously, consistently with what you want in life. And when you pivot your attention that way, you get good results. Well, I think the same thing is true for people who are escaping, for people who are dealing with traumas or failing to deal with traumas, failing to deal with life traumas, just things that happen on a day-to-day business in life. And when you continue to have losses there, and you continue to have an inability to accomplish much other than that quick escape, when you're looking at something from an escapist point of view, you eventually get to the point where you say, I need something more. That's what you did. You reached the point where you said, I need something more. I need something better than the answers I've been getting. So that's why I see the hope for us. I'm just trying to think, is there a way to bridge it? And I haven't been able to completely figure that out. But I'm glad that you think that we're doing the right. Well, to bridge from the people who are in the instant gratification / escape mode, who are ready to go to the next step. How do I push those people? And maybe there's not a way to do that. Maybe I just have to kind of let things happen the way they do.
The first step, in my opinion, is take their phone away. Last night, one of my friends, we were playing board games, and I said, I've got only a couple rules. The rules are no cell phones and no food or drinks at the table. And he had a lot of trouble putting his phone away, even just for 2 hours. And when it was someone like me, I feel the energy and the vibe in them. And when 3 of us are into it and one person's on the phone, it throws off the whole thing. It is the weakest link in the chain. In fact, it's a broken link in the chain. And I think that phones are instant gratification. It gives you get a dopamine rush even just hearing your phone buzz, even if you were to then open it up to find out something terrible has happened. But just hearing that noise gives you that gratification. So I'd say especially for young people, and even older people too, but mostly young people, like, take someone's phone away for 2 hours, or even if it's you, put your phone away for 2 hours and see if you can handle that. Or if you're like me and you use your phone to write notes or draw and stuff, put your phone on airplane mode so you'll get no notifications. You only have your, notepad and my sketch pad, and that way it's purely functional. There's no Instagram, no Facebook, no text messages, no emails. Because all of that, and this is something I realized too, because I always get the notifications for the emails. Like, it's like 1 out of 300 emails is important. So kind of, that would be like the thing earlier we were saying, find out what's bad. Okay, well, for years I've been getting these notifications, and I was like, wait a sec, this doesn't actually add anything to my life. I could just decide to check my email once a day, and that would be better than constantly getting spammed with all of these stupid notifications that I don't actually have any relevance to. But I think cell phones, like you said, the need or want for instant gratification always exists. That's human nature. Humans like things to be easy. Even those of us who like challenges, still are like, oh, nice, that was simple. I didn't have to do much there.
Right.
But the cell phones have damned a lot of people who. Because I know for me, I realized that when I was using my phone a lot, I was literally not in the world. I was in the world of my phone, and I was like, holy crap, when I'm here, I'm no longer feeling emotions. I'm like this husk, like this representation of a person, not a person. That's why lately I was like, okay, here's my rule. Like, if I'm on Instagram, it's only because I'm posting art or posting jokes. Or if I am texting, I'm not just, hopping on there just because. It has to be for a purpose.
Right.
But you have to first acknowledge that, and that's the tough thing. So
I'm going to make a note for next week, because we're out of time for this week, but I'm going to make a note for next week to talk more about the instant gratification, but even more this idea that you're proposing, which is pretty radical, that people put their phones down and turn them off. And I say it's radical because for somebody my generation doesn't spend a lot of time on the phones. I mean, my phone is like a really old phone. I don't have the most current phone at all. And it's because I check it like twice a day. That's it. And I check it for maybe 5 minutes. I don't spend a lot of time on the phone, whereas the younger generations, they spend all this time on the phone. So let's make that a topic for next week. Let's talk about this spending all the time on the phone and, all the things that are involved with it. Sound good?
Yeah, phones are going to be the cigarettes that are going to go, oh my gosh, you used to use a cell phone?
I love it. Well, this has been great. I don't think we have time to talk about it, but thanks for taking us in this direction. This is a good one. Very good. So
yeah, I got to go, but I'll catch you next week. It's always fun.
Yeah, I'll talk to you. We hope that all of our listeners come back next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.